Hello and welcome. This is Pam Bartha. Today we're going to be talking about multiple sclerosis and intestinal flukes. And not just MS, but people that have other chronic diseases also. I'll be sharing pictures of what our students have been passing. And I think this is really, really important for research so that if you are working with a practitioner and you're passing what looks like a fluke, you can kind of have a better idea, because there are really not a lot of pictures available to the public about what flukes look like. We're also going to talk about how they cause symptoms in multiple sclerosis and other chronic diseases, what types of symptoms they cause, and the best ways to treat flukes. If we haven't met, my name is Pam Bartha, and I'm the author of Become a Wellness Champion and the founder of Live Disease Free. And I am so honored to share this really important topic because I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis over 35 years ago. I was told by the doctors, by the experts, that there was nothing that I could do to change the course of my life. I'd be completely disabled in time. Boy, were they ever wrong. I learned early on that the MS that I was dealing with, multiple sclerosis, was caused by infections. We didn't know all the infections. We knew about Candida. That was the first type of infection that I was exposed to. Then later on, we learned about the Lyme infections, and even the Multiple Sclerosis Society talks a lot about them. And then in the past, I would say probably about 7 years or so, we've learned that with people that have MS and other chronic diseases, they don't just have different types of like bacteria and fungi, but they also have parasitic worms. And even for myself, this is a really important topic. Since I've learned this, I believe that I have had intestinal flukes too. And my students that we coach in the Live Disease Free plan, they've shared many, many pictures of intestinal flukes. So I wanted to share these with you. This is really for research. This is not to diagnose or to say what you should do or what you shouldn't do. This is to give you information, to work with a practitioner, to look at the symptoms, to kind of look at, like, is it possible that you have them? And then if you do start passing them, that you'll know what they look like or what some of them look like. And remember that there are many different types of species there's at least 70 different types of flukes that will infect humans. So intestinal flukes are a lot more common than we realize. They talk a lot about intestinal flukes being in Asia, and that we wouldn't have them in the developed countries in North America. They are a lot more common than we realize. And when you start digging, you start to see that, yes, they are present in North America, in developed countries, in Europe, all over the world, worldwide. So flukes are flatworms, and they are parasitic. They live mostly in the small intestine. That's where they would prefer to live. And they can cause so many different types of symptoms. They can cause digestive issues, anemia, toxemia, edema, and allergic reactions, neurological symptoms, and many other symptoms associated with inflammation. So they are really, really pro-inflammatory. They cause a lot of inflammation in the body. And we know that with all chronic diseases, we're dealing with inflammation. So this parasitic flatworm really causes a lot of inflammation in the body. So there are thousands of species or different types of flukes, but again, 70 are known to infect humans, to live in the human digestive tract. And it's estimated that tens of millions of people suffer with intestinal flukes worldwide. So it's not just in Asia, but worldwide. And hundreds of millions of people are at risk of having these infections, these intestinal fluke. There's other types of flukes. We're just talking about intestinal flukes today, but they are at risk if they eat contaminated food or they drink contaminated water. And just as a side note, in Canada, I've never heard, I learned a very little bit about flukes when I was doing my science degree. And I didn't really think that in Canada we have them, but just even in our lakes, the swimmer's itch, which our kids would swim in our lakes in British Columbia, Canada. And one of my sons had a really bad case of swimmer's itch, and I thought it was a bacteria. I didn't even look into it until recently. I found out that swimmer's itch is caused by a fluke, by a blood fluke. It's just schistosomiasis blood fluke. So that horrified me because I'm like, oh my gosh, so we are not aware that we have parasites in our environment in developed countries. And it's like what we believe is that we have to travel to another country to get parasites, but actually they are present in our soil. They're present in our water. They're present in our animals. They're present on our produce that comes in from other countries. You can get them on your food if you have somebody prepare your food in a restaurant and they don't, wash their hands well enough. You could get even the handles of shopping carts, door handles. Like parasites are part of life. It's just that we have not been aware of them. And for some reason, it's kind of like our doctors don't know about them. They don't think that we could have an issue with them. And this is a lost science and a lost skill in the developed countries. And our healthcare system has moved away from treating infectious diseases to treating autoimmune disease, where our immune system is apparently attacking our tissue for no apparent reason. So I don't agree with that, but that's where we're at in our healthcare today. So the most common intestinal flukes that are known are the giant intestinal flukes because they're the largest. They infect humans. They can grow approximately 2 to 10 centimeters in length. So these worms they're not going to be as long as the roundworms. They are going to be shorter than roundworms, and they're going to be wider, and they're flat. So they're very characteristic. There's basically roundworms, different types of roundworms. So they would be more like long, like a pasta noodle, like a round pasta noodle. Then there are tapeworms, which can be very long, but they're flat and they're they look like a ribbon, and they have segments. And then there are flukes, which are really flat and they're shorter and they're wider. And I'm going to show some pictures of them in a moment. So they can be about 2 to 10 centimeters in length and 0.8 to 3 centimeters wide. With their reproduction, intestinal flukes, they can reproduce both sexually and asexually, which is awful because they don't need a mate to reproduce inside of us. They can reproduce on their own. If you are infected with one intestinal fluke, they can produce eggs. It's called self-fertilization, which is awful. I'm going to show you some pictures of what I have found online as far as in a moment. Images of intestinal flukes, like kind of their internal structure, like where their bladder is and where their intestines are and their uterus, ovaries, and all the rest of it, you'll see. And it is quite shocking that if there are tens of millions of people around the world that have these and hundreds of millions that are at risk of having these flukes, then why is it that we don't see any pictures? Why is it that no real pictures are available? Very, very few. And I'm going to share a few pictures with you in a moment again. So how do we become infected with intestinal flukes? So before I go into this, I just want to share with you that, as I have been researching, a lot of the research on intestinal flukes has been done many, many years ago in the 1940s, 1950s. And when you go online and you look, you kind of just see what the CDC says as far as the life cycle. And it doesn't make sense with all of the hundreds of students that we've been working with, that they basically say with the life cycle of the fluke is that we can become contaminated with the larva. So that's the infectious stage. And that could be through meat. So let's say if we're eating pork and it's contaminated with the larva, the immature form of the fluke, then we can become infected with flukes through that. Or if we are drinking contaminated water. But they say that the life cycle is that there is a host that they say that they have to have 2 different hosts. One is where they carry out from the larva to the adult stage, And then the adult will lay eggs, and they say, oh, the eggs have to go back into the water, and they have to turn into larvae there, and then they have to reinfect. Whereas when you look at other ways, like you do more research, I don't think that we have the full story on flukes as far as what we are being told, because with our students, like if flukes only live for 2 years and you have an adult in you, then of course, if the adult just dies because you're not getting reinfected, then you should not have flukes anymore, right? So they're saying, oh, you can't pass them from one person to the next. And the only way you can't get it from your dogs or your cats, the only way you can get it is if you are eating pork or chicken. And that was another horrifying thing. You can actually get certain species of flukes from chickens. And then the adults, the larvae get into you, they turn into adults, they live in you for a couple of years and they die and you're done. And that's not what we're seeing in our students, is that, and even people that have flukes, like it seems that they can reproduce inside of our bodies. And when I've been doing some digging, it's like, yes, we don't have enough information on that. So what I'm sharing with you is what we are being told right now by our expert agencies, but it could be that it's completely wrong. This is completely overlooked. We're not even looking for flukes in people that have chronic disease. And it is, I believe it's a significant part of people that have chronic diseases because of the work that we do, and we see a lot. And again, when I show you the pictures, remember there's many different species. So some are going to be, they're like cousins. Some can be bigger, some can be smaller. But they say that humans can be infected through drinking contaminated water, eating raw or undercooked aquatic plants and fish, so salmon, trout, steelhead, shrimp, oysters, freshwater fish, and snails, or eating meat, and that can be pork, poultry, or beef, that is infected with the larva, so the immature form. So there's adult, larva, and egg. So the egg hatches into the larva is the immature form, grows into the adult. So they're saying that we would have to be infected with larvae, not eggs. They say eggs can't hatch in us. I don't know. I'm pretty skeptical about that. After the intestinal fluke larva is ingested by a human, they move into the small intestine, so that is their preferred habitat in the human body. They develop into adult flukes, and they attach to the intestinal wall in about 3 months. So the immature form moves into the small intestines, and it attaches to the wall of the small intestine. Human flukes produce eggs that are excreted through the stool, and there is a range depending on the species, but adult intestinal flukes can live for at least 2 years, but some species are known to live up to 10 years. Now let's look at the symptoms of intestinal flukes. So in the early stages of infection, where we have smaller numbers of flukes, if they're present in the small intestine, a person may not notice a lot of symptoms. So let's say you were just infected with a couple of larvae and they're just growing, you may not notice a lot. And so I do have one picture, and I think it's some kind of animal that has a bunch of liver flukes in it, but it just shows you like they must have drank water that was really, really contaminated. I honestly believe they can, because we know that they can reproduce asexually. I believe that they can actually reproduce inside of us. That makes complete sense with everything that I've seen. But anyhow, it's like parasites, or if you have like a very small number of parasites, you're not going to really notice a lot of symptoms. You might notice a little bit of bloating, a little bit of digestive issues, occasional constipation, but it's not going to be destroying your life. It's when the population of these parasites become much higher, then we end up with a lot of symptoms. And the symptoms are pretty crazy here. So the early symptoms of intestinal flukes, so hunger pains is one. That's an early symptom. 1 or 2 months after becoming infected with intestinal flukes, you can get abdominal pain and diarrhea, or constipation can occur. And when we have heavy infestations of these flukes, then we can have significant inflammation where we can have a lot of fatigue, weakness, ulcers, mucus secreted when the fluke attaches to the intestinal wall lining. Other symptoms include nausea, vomiting, weight loss, just feeling sick, fever, intestinal obstruction, allergic reactions and swelling of the face, abdominal wall, and the legs can occur. So we can have swelling of the face, the abdominal walls, and the intestinal wall. Other symptoms include weight loss, fever, and then severe infections can cause malabsorption and malnutrition. So we could end up with low albumin. So on our blood work, if we have our blood work done by our doctor, we could show that we have low albumin, so below normal blood test, and our vitamin B12, we can be deficient in vitamin B12, and we can have anemia. And then also things like calcium, magnesium, potassium, which are really critical for our muscle function. This can result in disruptions to that and muscle cramps, spasms, hyperexcitability of nerves, and spasticity. And then vitamin B1 also. So these are all like nutritional deficiencies we can have from flukes, from intestinal flukes. So vitamin B1, which is thiamine, and that impairs nerve function and can cause muscle stiffness and spasms. And vitamin B1 has been reported to help multiple sclerosis. So isn't that interesting? I really wonder how often we have flukes or intestinal flukes. And we may have even more than one type because there are flukes that infect our liver. So some of us can have liver flukes. There are flukes the blood flukes that will infect the blood and can affect our bladder. Schistosomiasis is really common that affects bladder issues, and a lot of people with MS and other conditions have chronic bladder issues. So in severe infections, diarrhea can alternate with constipation, and some people can experience bloody diarrhea. As the worm burden increases over time, systemic inflammation and intoxication from their metabolites, from the things that they produce from living inside of us, their poisons, can cause toxic effects. So we can have headaches, dizziness, vertigo, a general sense of not feeling well, cognitive impairment, malnutrition, low blood sugar, electrolyte imbalances that can affect our brain function and cause mental fog and difficulty concentrating, irritability, depression or anxiety, which can be the direct result of this infection, or indirectly because of the malnutrition and stress caused by the parasite. Peripheral neuropathy, eosinophilia, which is an increased number of white blood cells that attack parasites, and they're called eosinophils. Red blood cell count, and tingling, numbness, burning sensation in the extremities. Seizures, so they can even cause seizures, which are more common with liver or lung flukes when the larvae migrate to the brain. So just as, it's really sad, the more I study, the more it's depressing it is. But when we learn about the neurocysticercosis with the larva, so we could have a tapeworm in our intestine for years, but that's bad enough. But then their immature larva form, they can move into our tissue, they can move into the blood, into tissues, into organs, they move into the central nervous system and cause neurocysticercosis. Well, the larva from flukes also can migrate to different parts of the body, which would cause all kinds of issues, especially when they migrate into the brain. So we don't necessarily always have to deal with tapeworm larvae or the filarial worms that have been documented. It would be really interesting to know if some of the larvae from these flukes are also found in the brains of certain people that have neurological diseases like MS. Severe systemic infections or reactions to the flukes, to their poisons, can cause brain inflammation, leading to confusion, drowsiness, or impaired consciousness. As I mentioned, they're really, really nasty. You can have a buildup of fluid in the space between the lining of the abdomen and the abdominal organs, abdominal distension, pain, bloating, and gas, anorexia, If diarrhea persists, it can look kind of greenish yellow with a terrible odor. And it can cause, as I mentioned before, intestinal obstruction or perforation, and also protein loss from the damaged intestinal lining. This is the hypoalbuminemia. And some species of intestinal flukes, they can cause myocarditis, heart failure, brain bleeds, and intestinal fluke eggs in the spinal cord. So it's not just the larva, but it looks like the eggs can get into the spinal cord. They can impact motor and sensory function depending where the lesion is located. Because parasites cause lesions, and I've talked about that. That's another really important topic if you haven't seen that, but many different parasites cause lesions in the central nervous system. So these would also. So heavy burdens of intestinal flukes can indirectly strain the liver and the gallbladder. The migration of fluke eggs or the larva into the central nervous system can trigger inflammatory responses, resulting in tissue damage and many neurological symptoms. The severity of these symptoms often correlates with the parasite load and the host's, so our immune system response. Many parasites have ways to make themselves blind to our immune system, so our immune system doesn't get rid of them. And especially when they're starting to die, like if we're treating them, that we can start to notice more symptoms, because then our immune system is like, oh my gosh, what is this? I didn't see this before. I'm going to go after it. And then we can have more inflammation. So inflammation is our immune system's response to different types of parasites, to different types of pathogenic microbes that make us sick and cause disease. So co-infections associated with intestinal flukes. So there are some different infections that they see commonly with intestinal flukes. So Giardia would be one. And then secondary bacterial infections that would cause sepsis, toxic shock. And so basically these intestinal flukes, they suppress our immune system. They suppress our immune function. And they're studying this, right? They're studying different parasites, and they're looking to see like, well, how are these parasites suppressing the immune system? If we could figure out what substances they're producing to suppress the immune system, we could have a new patentable drug that we could give to MS patients that could suppress their immune system. That's not what we want, right? That is not what we want at all. So, and I said Giardia and different types of bacteria, different types of protozoa, and severe intestinal fluke infestations can be fatal. So how are they being diagnosed? How are these intestinal fluke infections being diagnosed? I don't think that in the developed countries they're looking for them. So I haven't seen anybody being diagnosed with them. So the diagnosis generally should be made by finding flukes or their eggs in stool or in vomit. Other tests, there could be iodine, formalin, and there's PCR tests. Because stool tests are inaccurate and they lead to false negative test results, we have found that energy testing could be more helpful. So instead of trying to figure out if we have flukes, what we do is we get energy tested by either a chiropractor or a naturopath, sometimes functional medicine doctors. I've seen acupuncturists and nurse practitioners that are all starting to learn energy testing. And so what they'll do is they'll take parasite medications and they will hold it into our energy field, and they will be able to pick up subtle changes on a machine or with muscle testing, to see if it helps to strengthen or balance us. And so if you test well for several parasite drugs that treat flatworms, then you probably have tapeworms or flatworms. And then when we use the oxidizing agent to do the enemas, these are the pictures that I'm sharing with you in a few minutes, so you'll understand like how we see these. So I can't say the name of the oxidizing agent or else I'll get censored, but it's basically like an oxygen type therapy we add to water, and that really helps to kill parasites on contact. And so important to know too that, remember I mentioned they like to live in the small intestine, so they're not usually found in the enemas unless we start treating with parasite drugs. So what we'll notice is that we might do some of these enemas, and then we don't really see flukes. But then if we start taking the parasite drugs that treat flukes, and then we start doing the enemas after, that's when we see them. And so all the pictures I'm sharing with you in a few minutes, they are from using these enemas. But it came from using flatworm medication. So that's really important to know. And then too, you'll notice that a lot of the pictures that I share don't look like the perfect shape of a fluke, because our students, they'll do an enema one morning and then they'll do a second enema the second morning. So the parasite will die after the first enema, and then our body starts to break it down, so it's not going to be perfectly intact. And so some of our students are really good, and they're starting to they'll do an enema and then they'll do one 6 hours later, so that the parasites look a lot more uniform and whole. And then that is better for research, right? Because it looks more intact. But you'll kind of get the hint or you'll get the impression, you'll understand that these are some type of flukes, because they're flat, they're wider, they're not as long as the roundworms. Tapeworms would generally be longer also. So let's talk about treatment for a moment. Again, this is strictly for educational purposes, and I'm not diagnosing, treating, or anything. I'm not replacing the necessary measures from your healthcare professional. This is something to talk to your doctor about. So praziquantel is the drug of choice for intestinal fluke infections. Also, niclosamide is another helpful one. What we have found with our students is that it is very helpful to use like a few different parasite drugs. There's a better killing effect. So yes, praziquantel is more helpful for tapeworms and for flukes, but praziquantel is also helpful for roundworms. So there's overlap with different parasites. Other drugs that could be helpful, that could help increase the killing effect, could be like albendazole, thiabendazole, mebendazole, levomizole, parental palmitoate, and a few others. So, and then too, you have to look at, which of the parasite drugs will kill the adults, which will kill eggs, larvae, etc. But apparently we don't have larvae in us. I really don't believe it from what I've seen coming out of my students and the length of time with some people that I know that are not able to treat, that are in countries that have had them and they still have them. It's not a self-limiting infection, I don't believe. I have never seen that. But if they self-fertilize and they need another host to complete their life cycle, then it wouldn't be a problem, right? Because they'd be done within a year or two, with maybe a couple of years. Okay. So artesunate has been used for certain types of intestinal infections. So that is like a type of wormwood. So that's artemisinin. And it's more of a form that you can inject. So a lot of the wormwood herbs that we would use them orally, but artesunate is something that our practitioners can use as an injection. It has some promising results, but it's really, really important. What we have seen with our students in recovering from all kinds of chronic diseases, that you really need to support the body first. And I see this more and more. Like, we're living in a time where so many people are so inflamed from these infections, from things in our environment that we did not deal with many years ago. So the EMF, RF radiation is a really big factor. It makes the parasites more virulent. They grow faster. They produce more poisons. Then we have got they are dimming our skies. I'm not going to say what the name of the word is, but they're putting particulates into our air. So we're dealing with more heavy metals. And then we've had that I don't want to say the name of it, but basically what we went through in 2019, 20, 21, that infectious agent that was manipulated by humans, that one also can persist in the body. And so that can really cause a lot more inflammation. So if we have parasites and then we end up having something like that's gain of function, then we're just so inflamed. And so if you start to try to treat parasites when you're feeling terrible and so inflamed and so many neurological symptoms and cognitive symptoms and weakness, it's just too much when you start treating. You have to first support the body. So we go on the Live Disease-Free diet, where we decrease the carbs, because that is the favorite food for all parasites, sugars and carbs. So we decrease that significantly, and people feel so much better. It's shocking. Then we support the body. So this is where we make sure that we're having daily bowel movements, we're sleeping well at night. We look at our blood work. We support certain aspects of physiology. So we talked about some of them where we might have deficiencies. We really support those areas. So before we start treating, we should be feeling a lot better. And then we can start to hit the parasites, right? And we use a combination of herbs in the Live Disease-Free plan. We recommend a combination of herbs, parasite drugs, and the oxidizing agents. So oxygen type therapies, but there's one in particular we like the most because you can do so much more with it. It's cost effective. That's the big thing, is it's super cost effective, and you can do more with it than ozone. Ozone is fine, but it's a lot more expensive, and it is not going to be as cost effective. Definitely not. All right, so just before I went on, I would just continue to research. I could research all day long if I had an opportunity to. I just love researching. And there was one species of intestinal flukes that I found. It is Alaria, and it is an intestinal fluke that infects dogs and cats, pigs and poultry, and other carnivores, so foxes, wolves, minks, as the final host. So that, remember, the final host means the larva gets in, grows into an adult. That is the final host. And then otherwise they need aquatic plants, and that's where they're going from egg to, that's what they're telling us, to go from an egg to a larva. The transport host is basically like a pig, poultry, and other birds, which can feed on the intermediate host. So they're saying that like frogs and tadpoles have I'm not sure about this species, but basically it has to start with frogs and tadpoles, and then the pig or the poultry will eat those, and then they become the infective stage where they have the larva. And then if we eat the poultry or the pork, then we become infected because they are the infective stage. Anyhow. And this is through a lot of research that I find that I think that this is what we're being told at this time. So humans can also act as a transport host. So this type of fluke is they say it's not infective in herbivores. So that would be the cattle, sheep, goats, and horses. And but this species, this Alaria species, is found worldwide, found in North America. And are animals infected with these flukes? Are they contagious to humans? They're saying no, but I don't know. They're saying no, you can't, because you're not eating your animals, but you can only become infected if you eat pork or the poultry that is infected with the larva. I wasn't thinking about poultry. I was thinking more, I've heard about beef flukes, and I've heard pigs are an issue, and the fish, but different types of flukes can infect, again, cats, poultry, and pork, horses, and our pets, dogs, livestock, sheep, goats. So please be aware that flukes can infect all kinds of animals and humans too. If you want to find the summary of my notes and all these pictures, they will be located on our website, livediseasefree.com, under blog, and we'll be publishing it at the end of the week. So just make sure that you stay connected with us. If you like this information, make sure to go onto our email list so you know when I am sharing more presentations like this. Why do we not see pictures of real flukes online? Why is it so hard to find them? And what I got is that basically the people that are doing the research, these are in studies, and that's not released to the public. And then also some of the old parasitology research that they've done on this, it was so long ago that it's just not really accessible, because it's like, maybe from the 1940s or 50s, and it's hard to get access to that online or even in universities. It's really interesting how parasites are really hidden from us, like the information about them, pictures about them, doctors aren't trained on them. And it's really awful because I believe that all chronic diseases are infectious diseases. We've talked about, parasite drugs treating cancer, curing cancer, and some of the really wonderful influencers online are starting to talk about this. And a lot of people are starting to, and this is the bad part, a lot of people are really desperate because they're suffering so much. And so they're starting to just trying to get their hands on different parasite drugs, and they're trying this one and that one at different doses. And some of them are getting really sick, and others, it's not really making a difference. And you can't do that. It's just not worth it. And then another practitioner that he's got a protocol for everybody, like a couple of them. And we haven't found that. Like if you have different types of parasites, then you're going to need different types of treatments. And so just using a cookie cutter approach isn't going to give you what you want. If you want to recover, then you have to really do everything in your power to have an accurate treatment plan for what you're dealing with. And yes, we don't have good parasite tests, but what we do have is, like in the Live Disease Free plan, we use 6 pieces of criteria. We look at the student's health history, the health history of their parents. We look at what they were diagnosed with. We look at their symptoms. We look at their energy test results. And then we look at their pictures of what they're sending in, like I'm going to share with you in a moment. And just be aware, this is viewer discretion coming up here right away. Intestinal flukes, the first couple of pictures are not really anything too scary. So this is like a sketch of the internal structure. They're like oval shaped, or they're kind of a little bit oblong shaped, and they're usually, you can't see through them. The ones that I've seen a lot, they're usually like kind of a creamy, and that's also being oxidized, so like a light brown color usually, but they can be different colors. And you'll be able to look at this in more detail later on. And so this is another an image. Like this is not a real image, so you can see like maybe pay attention to the left-hand side where you see the oral sucker, and then you see the intestine, because I'm going to show you some pictures where you can actually visibly see what looks like intestines. And so these are a couple of, and I don't even know if they're totally true images. Maybe the one on the right is a real image of flukes. And I'd like you to also pay attention to, on the ends, how they're not as dense. And so when we're doing these oxidizing enemas and we're killing them, and then they're staying in our body for 24 hours, and we're passing them with the next enema, and our body is breaking them down, you can see that some parts of the intestinal fluke will become more digested than other parts. So the thicker part, where more of the organelles are, the organs, etc., they will not be digested as much. So this is actually a real picture of a liver and liver flukes. So this is very interesting. And so these are intact. This would have been probably an animal that, I don't know if this is a deer or an elk or something. It's some kind of animal, and these are liver flukes. But you can see how infested we can become with flukes. And that is something else that we see in our students, is when they're treating and they're sending me pictures, like it's shocking how many parasites we can have inside of us and still be alive. It is really shocking. Like one of my most recent students, who is a healthcare professional in another country, she has documented passing 200 worms, and she had a not MS, but another demyelinating disease, and she's tap dancing. She's not 100% cured, but she's that much improved, and she's going back to work in February. Okay, so this is these are liver flukes, so they're found in the liver. And now we're going to go on to, okay, so this is what liver flukes. So sometimes they can look a little bit like a leaf. So this is a real picture also, I'm sure. And again, there could be different species of liver flukes, and some could be bigger and some could be smaller, but they almost look like a little piece of liver or something. They're slippery. Okay, are you ready for the real ones? Okay, so this is what our students are passing. So this one is definitely more intact, and this one was passed with I think it was like the student mentioned that the night before he took like the parasite drugs and passed this in the morning with an enema. So that is pretty quick. So that would have been maybe, I don't know, like 8 to 10 hours at the most. So not 24 hours. So this one is definitely held together well. The next one, that's from another student. So this one would have been from an oxidizing enema. So you can see that the tail end of it is a little bit more clear. This is, I wonder if I can move myself. I'm going to try to move myself out of the way here. Yeah, I think so. There we go. So this is, I'm going to share with you, and what our students are doing too is we're documenting laying out the worm on parchment paper or tin foil, because if you use paper towels or toilet paper, it just shreds them, right? They stick to it and it just rips them apart. So if you lay them out on tin foil or parchment paper, put a measuring device by it, whether it's a tape measure, whether it's a ruler, whatever measuring, so that otherwise we have no idea how big they are. And then, so they'll do that, but they'll also lay them in water, like in a bowl, because you get a whole different perspective, you'll see when you do that. Oops, just a sec, I gotta move over here. Okay, sorry, this is a different picture. So this one looks like a totally different type of, I suspect they're still flukes, but this is from a totally different student, and they could be different species. And these ones are a lot more intact, like complete. This one is another one from a different student. There's no measuring device beside it, so I don't know how big it is, but again, very characteristic, a lot flatter and wider than you would see in tapeworms and other worms, roundworms. So here's another one. So this one is, so these are, often they're about like, if they're mature, it could be 3 inches. Some of them I've seen are 4 inches, 5 inches, and maybe, being partially digested, they're stretching out farther than they should, but they can be in the adult stage, the big ones, the giant ones, they can be at least 3 inches or longer. So this last picture here, so this is what the student passed and laying it down on tinfoil or parchment paper, I can't tell. But then this is where they put it in water. And so you can see, and I've seen so many of these pictures and they look really, really characteristic. I wish I could move myself out of the way here. Let's see if I can. Like that. So again, the one on the left, the image on the left-hand side is partially digested by the body. So, but it's still, the remains of it is still there. And you can see that it still has what looks like intestines in it. Okay, and then let's go to the next one. So this is the same fluke as, I believe, no, this is a different one, sorry. I have to go over here and move myself out of the way again. Okay, so this is, I just labeled this fluke number 1. So this is laid out on parchment paper, I think, or tin foil. And then the image to the right of it is if it's in a bowl. So some people put it in like a metal bowl, seems to show it a lot better than a plastic bowl would. So you can see that this is very characteristic. So the one on the left, like some of you might think, well, that just looks like some like mucus or blob. But when you look at it, and I'm going to share with you on my blog post a video where the student is kind of moving it around, you'll see that they're solid. They're not falling apart. It's not like mucus or biofilm. It's a solid mass of worm. All right, and so we'll go to the next one. So these are both this is the same fluke, and this is the same fluke on the other end of it, like the bottom side of it. So really nasty. This one is quite intact still. And again, it really depends on when the students send me the pictures, how, like when the parasite died, how long it was sitting in the body before they flushed it out. Okay, and this one is fluke number 2. So you can see what they look like out of the water. And then, sorry, I can't move the slide up. You'll see everything accurately on our website. I was fighting with these platforms here. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the fluke that's laid out and measured the length. So it is over 3 inches long. And then in the metal bowl, you can see that again, it's broken up because they've done an oxidizing enema, and the immune system or the body has been digesting it. This is the same fluke. Let me just double check. Number 2. Yes, number 2. So then you can see they always have these ribbed lines in them that are probably the intestines. Okay, so we'll go to the next one. So this one is a different species. I don't know, maybe it's immature form, but it's definitely it's smaller. And I think that's the only picture I have of that one. So this is number 4. So these are all different ones. So this one is about 1, 2, 3, 4 inches long. And you can see again on the right-hand side, like they're always like the intestines you can see, or the lines. I'm assuming they're intestines when you look at the structure of these flukes. And then this is it in water without you can see. And again, I'll have the video on my website where you can actually see them poking it with a fork and moving it around, and you'll see that it's like pretty solid, very solid. So you can imagine if you have a bunch of these in your digestive tract, and then I assume that sometimes they will move into your liver, gallbladder area and they can cause a lot of pain. And I mean, liver flukes will definitely infect the liver, but these can definitely move into different parts of your digestive tract, and they can cause a lot of inflammation. And I have passed intestinal flukes in the past, and they do cause a lot of inflammation. I've experienced, and when you get them out, it's just like shocking. It's so shocking. And I'm like, what the heck is this, right? Because this is not something we really learned about in school. If this is the first time that you have found me and are looking at our work, make sure if you like what I share, please like, share, and subscribe to help us get the word out, to help us get more discussions on this topic. Please share this with your practitioners. We have practitioners all over the world that are like, I just hear about it through people that talk to me. It's like, yeah, my practitioner told me about you and about your, what we're doing. So that's really exciting. But I mean, it's not fast enough for me. And if you have a practitioner and they want to find out more about what we're doing and the research we have, make sure to have them reach out to us. Make sure to share this with, if you're a parasitologist, look at these pictures and tell me what you think, because, there's very little information out there. And through all the research I could see is that when they're flat and when they're shorter and wider, they are flukes, but of course there could be many different species. So please help us get the word out. And if you need support, if you don't have a practitioner that has experience with this, and unfortunately most of the integrated practitioners don't either, they just don't have that yet. It's really frustrating. But make sure to watch my masterclass training. It's free. You'll know all the steps we take to recover. If you need support, then make sure to fill out the form, book a time with me. And when you fill out the form, you'll get an email with a link to my calendar. You'll be able to chat with me, but also watch the coach-a-thon before we meet, because then you can really go through all the steps so you understand, like, how do we access treatments? How do we find the doctors? How do we, how are we treating? Like most of the questions you'd be asking, you'll find on the coach-a-thon. So watch that before we meet, and I would be honored to support you. We've had a ton of new students join before Christmas, which is so amazing because they don't want to wait till after they binge on all the carbohydrates and over the holidays, and then they're feeling so much worse. They're trying to get a handle on their health before the holidays, and I'm really honored to support them. And just, if that's one of you listening, congratulations. I'm really excited for you. 2025 is going to be an amazing year. So with that, I'm going to let you guys go. We will talk to you next week. Take care and bye-bye for now.